Well, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Prep Talk. As per usual, I have Mark with me. We just wanted to kind of touch base on some things that, that Mark has been interested in. He's been working on this kind of stuff for, I don't know, how long have you been doing this for?
3 years now.
3 years. So Mark's been homesteading for about 3 years now. And we just kind of wanted to talk about that a little bit and discuss what the pros and cons are and why it might be good for your spiritual life as well. So where do you want to start with that, Mark?
Yeah, well, we called the episode
Into the Wilderness.
Into the Wilderness. Yeah. So, we made this decision a while back. We came from the Edmonton area in Alberta, and so this is a big city. And we actually moved out of the Edmonton area just to a little outskirts town initially, but we were still working and having to do a lot in the city of Edmonton. But we came to a conviction finally, for a lot of reasons, and we'll go into that a little bit, that we needed to just really unplug, basically. And so we just really had a desire in our hearts to be off the grid. So we really want to do this off-grid living. And of course, it's interesting because now, especially, we did this about 3 years ago, but now with everything that's gone on in the last 2 years, actually a lot of people are starting to not want to be in the cities anymore because of the way things went down.
Well, that's kind of what I wanted to ask you, if you don't mind, is like kind of what was it that got you kind of started on this path? What went through your brain to kind of get you interested in off-grid?
Well, I actually grew up living in the country. I was raised in the country.
Right,
actually.
Okay.
And so, that was kind of the lifestyle I was already used to. But we gravitated to the city, as pretty much everybody does, for a lot of reasons. Things are more convenient, things are more accessible. There's more jobs. That's a big factor as well. And but with that, there's a lot of downside as well. And so we just the negative started outweighing the positive for us. But it was also something that, our church has been teaching this for a long time, for like 150 years. Our particular church has been teaching this. The Seventh-day Adventist Church
has been teaching this, since 1880 or something like that?
Yeah. And the reason for it, from our church standpoint, is the country living allows you to be self-sufficient, allows you to grow your own food, and to have access to free water, and of course, also to just be away from a lot of the negative influences.
Well, I was also thinking like a lot of the stuff that you experience in city, there's a lot of noise, a lot of just unnatural things in the city constantly that you're dealing with, right? And so I think like you living out in the bush gives you that ability to go back to nature in a way, right? Just
Yeah, definitely a lot more peaceful. That was probably the biggest thing when we moved out, was the quiet at night. Other than the occasional owl, or we've had wolves lately howling a little bit, but that's a lot better than gunshots and car crashes.
Yeah.
So, there's definitely some blessings to it. But the biggest thing for us, though, was the off-grid aspect of it. And so
what you mean by that then is like you're just not tied to the system at all.
Right. So because what we found, even after we moved out of the city to the smaller little town outside the city, we were still on city power, we were still on city water, we were still on a lot of these things, and the cost of those things were just so astronomical. And we both had to work and have these jobs just to pay utility bills. Like, utility bills were 35% of our monthly budget was just utility bills.
So when you say utility bills, you're talking about gas and electricity and all that kind of stuff. You're not even talking about rent?
Not even talking about rent. We're just talking about gas, electricity, water, sewer. And so, like, for instance, water was a big one. And, because water literally comes from the ground, And yet, because we're on the city system, it's metered and we have to pay for it.
Right.
So you get charged a certain amount of money per cubic meter of water. You look at your bill, and you know what? A lot of people probably don't even look at their bills because I need this, I got to pay for it.
Yeah.
I started actually looking at the bill and realizing how much we were getting charged for. And then because you're tied in with the city sewer system, you get charged for the water that goes back out too, but it's not metered. So they do it on an estimate basis based on what does come in, and they just estimate, well, 35% of what comes in goes back out through the sewer, so we'll bill 35% to go back out. But it's not metered. So I mean, anything you're out watering your garden and it goes into the ground, that they're still calculating that water that you're watering your garden with. They're still charging you for 35% of the water to go back out through your sewer, even though it's not. Right. So some of these things. Another thing was the gas bill, and anybody looks at their gas bill, you'll see you have your price per gigajoule or whatever of gas that you use, but then you see all these other things, rate riders and interest and taxes and delivery charges and variable delivery charges and fixed delivery charges, and then there's tax on all of those things, and so by the time you add all that up, some months those were actually more than what the actual gas was. I noticed on the bills. And so when we started doing this off-grid thing and we were looking for property, we would shut all the utilities off, and we'd go on the road for a month and travel around looking for property. And we turn all these utilities off, like literally off. So there's no pilot burning, there's no gas being moved through the gas lines. The breakers on the house, I shut the main breakers off, so there isn't even any draw.
Oh, you shut your breaker off like right?
I just turned the breakers right off. Well, we had an older house, and who knows, there could be some draw from something. Yeah. And I was going to be gone for a month. I didn't want to have anything drawing on it. So I turned the main
it's also
breakers.
Probably safer for anything that could happen while you're gone. Right?
Yeah, and same thing, I turned the water main valve coming into the house right off. I had some leaky taps. I didn't want to be paying for drips out of my kitchen sink for a month. You'd be surprised, it adds up. And so we would be gone for a month, and I would come back, and all the utility bills would come in for that month period that I was gone. And with all the delivery charges and rate riders and all this stuff, even though I didn't use anything, between the gas and the power, water and sewer and garbage pickup, it was still almost $200 a month. And I didn't use anything.
Right. So you were basically handing them $200 a month.
Yeah. And the same thing with the gas. I argued, the gas was delivered to the outside wall of my house where the meter is the month before, and I didn't use it. And now you're charging me again to deliver the gas now that I'm using it. So it's like you're charging me twice, because they charge that delivery charge every month, whether you use the gas or not. Right. Well, that's not right.
No.
So it was a lot of these things that really was weighing on us and going, well, man, we're just like throwing money down a bottomless pit with these utility charges. So we really wanted to be off grid for that reason. And so, by off grid, I mean totally not connected. And whereas a lot of people and even now, even cities are promoting solar panels and all this stuff, but they want you to be tied in with the grid.
Yes.
And that of course ends up being a lot more expensive. There's other equipment that's required of it. But what we wanted to do was we wanted to be completely off the grid. So
was that partly because you didn't really want to be dependent on anybody?
Well, I wanted to have the power to turn things off and not still be charged money.
Right.
So I wanted to be 100% in control of how much power I use and what I use. And so the only way you can do that is to not be part of the grid. So, I just have a picture here of the small system I have. So I actually have 4 small systems powering different aspects around my property. And it works quite well, but we've had to make some sacrifices. We can't sit and watch TV 24 hours a day, but you shouldn't be anyway. So, but these small systems are actually quite affordable. And in the 3 years that we've had them, they've already paid for themselves.
Oh, good.
So we're basically, our electricity has been essentially free for the 3 years. We broke even, and so now we're actually saving money now. At some point, I'll have to replace some batteries, and I might have to replace some panels at some point. But with the small systems, you can actually stay ahead. So, and then it gives us that power too. If we're not there, it's all controlled. It has a charge controller. So if we're not there, the sun keeps shining, it keeps going, but the batteries aren't going to overcharge because they have a controller that protects that. And so there's no risk there of anything. I actually have breakers I can turn off the flow if I want to. Good. But it's all controlled, so there's no risk. We can leave, and there's no risk there or anything. And And so that gives us a lot of flexibility, and it doesn't cost us anything. Now, out here in BC, a lot of times we do have a lot of power outages because trees come down on the lines, the heavy snowfall bends the trees down. And so a lot of times our neighbors have been no power, and we didn't even know there was a power outage. So it's been a real blessing that way.
Yeah.
Like, my neighbor, for instance, he has to have electricity to pump his water into his house. So he can't even, and he has an electric hot water tank, so he can't even have a hot shower
without electricity. Yeah.
So, if we have power out sometimes 24 hours before they get it back on, he has no access to hot water. He doesn't have access to any water because he can't pump it out of the well. And he has to go get his backup generator, to keep his fridge going. And so it's been a real blessing that way. We have a backup generator too that we sometimes run to top up the batteries when we have a long period of overcast days, which this time of year it does happen a little bit. But it's really minor, it's inconsequential, right? So that brings to the other factor was the water. As I said, the water was a big factor. We wanted to have free water. I mean, it literally comes out of the ground. I don't want to have to pay for it.
Right, yeah.
And something a lot of people have already had is septic systems with discharge fields, and once that's installed, that's basically free. Mm-hmm. So we wanted to have a large enough property to be able to do that, and so we did that. But we've got a gravity feed water system, and I got this little. I had to build this little cabin here for the gravity feed water to come into, so that it doesn't freeze in the wintertime. So the water lines are all buried in the ground, so they don't freeze. But we do come and bring it into a big storage container. And then I have an overflow off of that storage container that takes it out into a pond. And then that overflows goes back down into the creek. So we diverted the creek to come through. And then this little cabin here is all insulated so that it keeps the water from freezing during the winter.
Oh, okay.
So we got free water coming all year round. It doesn't freeze, and nice, fresh, pure, clean water, and we don't have to pay a cent for it.
Okay.
So that saved us a lot of money right there as well. And then so we have the electricity, we have the water, the sewer goes into our septic discharge system. So the only thing that we're still paying for is we still do pay for propane, but it's delivered to the house.
Oh, okay.
So we do heat with wood heat. Just like they did in the old days. We do heat with wood heat because wood is free, especially when you live in the forest. But we still do have propane coming as a backup, and my fridge actually runs on propane.
Right, okay, fair enough.
So propane is still very cheap currently. And the nice thing about it being delivered to the house is I can just stop them from delivering it at any point in time. And by delivery, I would literally mean they drive out to my house with a truck and fill it up.
You got like a 100-pound tank or something?
Yeah, like a big 400-pound.
Oh, okay.
So and it lasts us. We only fill that tank maybe 3 times a year.
Oh, really? That's good. Awesome.
So it's actually was cheaper than our natural gas bill when we were on the grid by almost half.
Oh, wow.
And then the nice thing again, like I said, if we want to go away for a couple of months, 3 months. I just phone them up and say, hey, don't worry about me. I'm going to be gone for a while. Mm-hmm. No problem. So they don't deliver, I don't pay.
Right.
Whereas with the natural gas, even if I was gone, they still charged me
a connection fee, basically.
And they even charge you for just having the meter on your house. So even if you have everything shut off, you're still going to be paying something.
Yeah.
Right? So we covered all those bases and really reduced our cost of living dramatically by getting off of the grid.
So I guess in that respect, I'd like to ask a couple questions then. Was the trade-off of convenience worth it for you? Because now you have a lot more work you have to do. You have to get firewood. You have to, make sure that your water doesn't freeze. You have to make sure all of these different things that you didn't necessarily have to worry about before. Now, how does that affect your life?
Yeah, well, that's, I grew up in the country, so I grew up having to do chores around the house, and we had a wood stove growing up too, but it wasn't a necessity. But having something to do and working and having to do chores is good. It's good. It's healthy. It's character building. We get so lazy with these conveniences, and I really feel sorry for people that are just entrenched in the city so much and have all these conveniences, and even people have even admitted, they're scared to move out to the country because they're like, oh, I don't know if I'm going to be able to handle it. But it's just all a case of what you get used to. But it is mentally, even though there are some hardships and some trials, it is mentally rejuvenating to know that you have control of what you're doing, that you're not dependent on a company or the government or things like that, and that you have that responsibility. And so it's good character building.
So what you're telling, what I'm hearing from you then is that it's the trade-off is worth, like the trade-off of not having as much convenience and then having to do a little bit more work is actually better. My perspective would be then that you're less stressed because you're not worried about being under anyone else's, like they can decide that they're going to turn the power off. They can decide that they're going to turn the gas off. They can do all these things to you, whereas you don't have to worry about that. Go ahead, turn off the gas. What you got to do, right?
Yeah. And so the same thing too, with not having all those financial responsibilities, we don't have to make as much money either. Right. You know, and with the volatile job market and things not being, so like I said, the city, you have more employment opportunities, right? That's a given. Out in the country, finding a good steady job is definitely a lot harder to do. But at the same time, you don't need to make that kind of money.
Well, also that, like, and part of that is because you're able to kind of grow your own stuff on your own property if you so choose, like a garden. You can have animals if you wanted, you know, all these different things, and then you don't have to run off to the grocery store whenever you need something.
Yeah, you can sustain yourself a lot longer, get into canning and preserving and a lot of these things so that you can have food through the winter.
Well, like you, I grew up kind of not necessarily off grid, like we were still like had power and stuff, but we grew up with wood heat. My mom was really into canning. Like we probably could have lived a full year in our house without ever touching a grocery store. So we grew up the same way, you know, canning. We did, for at least 3 years, I think it was, we ran to an outhouse every day whenever we needed to go. And we weren't that far away from town. We actually, if you know where Nicusp is, that's where I grew up for about 8 years. And that was, we were only 5 kilometers out of town, but we still lived pretty much off grid.
So, and that's the interesting thing is because that's actually how people used to live. You know, people talk about off-grid now like it's some new trend.
I know,
some new hippie trend, like being off-grid is some new hippie trend that everybody's gravitating to. But it's like, but no, being off-grid is not the new thing. That's actually the old thing. And it's interesting because I did some checking, and as far as electrical grid goes, the electrical grid didn't even exist until just very recently. 1960 was the first, it was about 1960 where they actually had a big enough grid where they could say they had a grid.
Wow.
And where multiple towns and would be connected to it, and then the rural areas started connecting more and more. That wasn't very long ago. Before that, people were oil lamps, cooking on wood stoves, and gas wasn't even a thing then, right? You know, it was all wood heat, wood cooking, and oil lamps for light in the early 1900s. So that's not very long ago. And the whole history of mankind before that, people were off grid.
And I can see it nowadays because people were like that for so many hundreds of years, thousands of years. You can, like, I see the negative of being on grid, being like we've gotten so convenient that we've become lazy. Right. And I say that for myself, like, man, I tell you, I got everything that I need in my apartment. I live in town. I don't live off grid like you. I don't need to go anywhere except to the grocery store to do anything. Right. And I don't like that. I don't like that it actually kind of feeds a bit of a laziness into your life almost. Right.
Well, we can look at even, we have our examples from the Bible too as Christians, right? So even our examples in the Bible, we have the examples of Abraham and Lot, the story of Abraham and Lot. Abraham settled out in the plains outside of the city where they could grow crops and have their livestock. But Lot was drawn to the city more. And so he set up just real close to the city, and he wanted those conveniences. And of course, he just ended up getting sucked right into everything. Yeah. And to the point where Abraham, had to plead for God to rescue him out of that city because of everything that was going on in there.
So then you're saying that there's a bit of a spiritual aspect to this then?
Absolutely. And so again, the story Tower of Babel was another instance, right? So we have the story where after the flood, a few generations went by, society started building up, and all these families started growing. And instead of going out and filling the earth like God had told them to do, they started building a city, and they wanted to build everything and work together into this big collective. And the Bible even says, they wanted to make a great name for themselves. And then God said, if we don't disperse them, there's not going to be, there won't be anything they won't be able to accomplish. And so this is, and of course he meant that in a bad way. The wickedness is just going to magnify and amplify because they're all together.
Right.
And why is that? Because people are inherently wicked because of the curse of sin.
That's right. Yeah.
And so this is why we see this is what happens in the cities.
Exactly.
The cities, you have so much more drug use and so much more crime and so much more violence, and all these things are in the cities, and it's a natural thing that when you put that many people that close together, bad things happen.
Well, it just amplifies the wickedness that's in our hearts, right? Whereas if we separate ourselves a little bit, we actually have room to process our wickedness and get rid of it.
And more time to be prayerful and contemplative and think about what's going on. But we get caught up in things so much in the city. And
well, I mean, God said to Adam and Eve right in the very beginning, he says, your sons go marry your wives and cleave one to another and go do your own thing, right? He didn't say stay with father and mother and stay in the same area and all this kind of stuff.
Right.
He said, go start your own family, start your own thing, right? And I think that's what I personally see our cities and these great metropolitans, all these things, is actually a systematic way of herding us basically all into these areas, and then being able to control our lives much more than like your situation. They can't control you in any way with what your life is. I mean, they can force you off your property maybe, but they can't control what you do, in your own world, in your own property, right? Whereas where I live in a small town, they can just come and say, hey, look, we're cutting your power and your water and whatever that they want to cut, and then I'm hooped, right? I have nothing. And so I see these, these cities and these metropolitans and even the small town that I live in as a herding mechanism to get everybody in a situation where they have more control.
Well, and that's what it is. I think when you get these governments start to realize that it's easier to control people when you have them boxed in.
Yes.
So so that's why we see. So because of all the bad things that naturally happen in cities, we have to have more rules in the cities.
Yes,
that's understandable. But the wickedness tends to want to exploit that.
Yes.
And so and that's what the last couple of years really opened a lot of people's eyes, because they started to see this sense of control that was coming over people, and more bylaws coming in, and more things were being infringed on, and people were starting to lose their choices. And we especially saw it in the cities. Out in the countries, they just have less control over that because they don't know. Where I live, actually, we don't even have zoning bylaws, which is an even bigger plus.
So you can basically do whatever you want on your property.
We don't have bylaws. We don't have bylaw officers.
Right.
So if something happens, if your neighbor's doing something you don't like, you actually have to go and talk to your neighbor about it.
Right.
You can't just phone up somebody and rat them out, and they go get slapped with a ticket. We don't even have that option. So, and that is a blessing, because you have to actually get along with your neighbors. But we don't have those. We don't have that control then either. We don't have those kind of rules. So So some of the things that are going on, and this has actually been going on before, but we can see them coming down the line, and more things are getting talked about. And this is why I felt it was important to talk about, because it's more and more now we're seeing that control take on these new levels. And I mean, this is, the Bible talks about it, and God talks about in the last days there'll be this one power that's going to rule over everybody, and even to the point where they're going to be able to restrict people from being able to buy and sell.
Yes.
So that's a huge amount of control. And so we have some things coming down the line here that are really need to pay attention to it. And one of them here, this one's from Time magazine even, and this started a few years ago, but it's really been in the headlines recently. They were wanting to ban gas stoves, but not just gas stoves, even like cooking on wood stoves. They want everybody to be on electric. They want to even ban the gas furnaces that and like central heating that people have, and they want everybody to be on the electrical grid. Well, we already know the electrical grid isn't barely, like around where I live anyway, it's barely supporting itself already, never mind. You go into these big cities, a lot of places are having rolling blackouts already as they are.
Right.
There's places even in BC here, some towns have, scheduled reduction times, because when it's colder, people are running their electricity more to stay warm. And then during the summer, people are running their air conditioners more to stay cool. And so they have these peak hours. And so they have these rules now where you have to reduce your usage during those hours so they don't overload the system.
That I hadn't heard about. That's interesting.
And so, and this is even in BC, a lot of places in the States have that. And so they already can't handle the power needs already, and they want to force everybody else on it. They want everybody to buy electric cars and then be charging their cars all night on top of that. So something really needs to desperately change if they want everybody on electric. But they're going ahead and trying to push to ban the gas and the natural gas and the wood, which, for people like me off grid, that's kind of a big deal.
Well, and that's kind of why I kind of look at all these bannings of different things, like they try to spin it in a good way. Mm-hmm. Oh, we're saving the planet, we're doing this, or whatever it might be that they're the good. Right. But then I also see the very dark side of what they're doing, and I see it more as taking things away from us, not as
well. They do, and they come up with these reasons, but if you do a little research, the reasons aren't really have a basis in the reason why the cooking over the wood stoves and the gas stoves, they say that it releases toxins into the air, and they've been trying to say that it increases childhood asthma rates in the home because it's releasing these toxins into the air. Well, in a properly designed new home, we have proper ventilation systems.
Exactly.
We have the big range hood over the stove, and you turn that fan on when you're cooking, and it sucks all the fumes out. And same with the wood stoves. That's why we have codes.
And the truth is,
properly sealed wood stove in your house.
These kind of gases, when you ignite them, they're burning off pretty much everything. I mean, you get a smell from them, but they're not that much toxins in them.
So even in my little cabin, the little wood stove I have in my little cabin, it's still a sealed double flue system. I do get a little smoke comes into the room when I'm first lighting the fire up, and once it starts drafting properly, then it's no issue. And we burn that fire all night, and we sleep in there all night, and we've been doing that for 3 years, and we're fine.
Well, you don't look charred or smoky to me.
No, and I'm more of a risk from the respiratory diseases that were floating around than I was from my campfire. So, but the reason the studies were really referring to more tribal people in third world countries that were cooking in their houses with literally an open fire. When you have an open fire in your home, you're going to have some smoke inhalation and some problems, but that's not the case for most, Western nations.
Exactly.
Yeah. So they're doing a little bit of like bait and switch kind of thing there, where they have a clear problem, but they're applying it where it doesn't belong, and they're using that as the excuse.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
So here in this article here from American Homestead, this is so this really affects me, is they're actually banning wood and gas stoves. So I'd have to say goodbye to my propane and my wood, and my solar system is not big enough to run electrical heat pumps. So I'd have to either go spend thousands of dollars for a much bigger system. And so here in, this is January 10, 2023, this article, this is a Bloomberg article, I believe. The New York is already proposing banning it in any new buildings. So that's where they're going to start, right?
Of course, yeah, they start with all the,
They're not going to rip everybody's out of their existing building, but just from now on, we're not going to put any gas stoves in.
And people will buy that. Oh, well, it doesn't affect me right now. It's fine. Yeah.
So even a lot of the big restaurants and stuff are really up in arms about it because they cook on gas. And there's a reason why they cook on gas and not electric.
Yes.
For the commercial cooking, they have better control over the heat, and they don't burn the food, and so they're quite upset about this as well. But this is where the government push is. And again, in this one article, it talks about it. It says, it says a lot of reasons, health reasons, and asthma, toxic pollutants, and then it throws in climate security as well.
Wow.
Like they always got to throw that in there, right?
Yeah.
So it always ends up coming back to that, the climate. They connect everything with the climate. They're even saying people are dying from heart attacks now because of the climate.
Yeah, I know, which is absurd.
So the climate is kind of the climate protection is really the big thing right now. So that brings us to another point of this point of control. So like I said, the Bible warns us that a time comes where people won't even be able to buy and sell. So they're trying to herd everybody, it seems like, into a box where they can control more. They're restricting what they can do independently. You have everybody on the electrical grid. You start to get into these things like social credit systems, which exists. This is not conspiracy theory stuff. China's doing it already. They've been doing it for a long time. Yeah. And if you don't behave properly and do what's right in the society and contribute properly, it affects your social credit score. And then what? If you're not measuring up, then you start losing access to certain things. So when everybody's on the grid and under electrical and under all this stuff, it makes it real easy for the governments to start restricting things and saying, if you don't do this, then you don't get to do that. And we saw a real taste of that in the last 2 years, where if you didn't get vaccinated, then you weren't allowed to go to the gym. You didn't have that passport card, you couldn't go into certain restaurants.
And the thing is where does that end, right? Like, oh yeah, it was only the gym and it was only this. I mean, it wasn't the grocery stores, right?
Right.
But where does that end, right?
But it was a really good taste of what they could actually do as they more and more control things. And so, even still, you some people can't fly, you still can't cross the border in some countries still because of because of the vaccine. But, what would it take? I mean, now they're even talking about removing, world-renowned psychologists' licenses.
Wow,
because they're not saying what they want to say. And, fortunately, people are quite upset about that, and hopefully that doesn't happen. But it's a taste of what's to come.
Well, it just proves what a dictatorship is coming. We have a dictatorship coming.
Yeah. So the other thing that's coming down the line here too is the cryptocurrencies, and of course, they've been around for a little while, but they're independent. But what's happened now is the government's been talking about having a central bank digital currency, and so they actually, again, they want everybody to be tied to the crypto grid, as it were. Right now, basically, the cryptocurrencies are, I'm not an expert on the subject, but basically the cryptocurrencies are like off-grid. They're their own thing, they're independent, government doesn't have any control over them. And so they were actually talking about doing central digital currency. And so this is actually from the White House website. So this isn't conspiracy stuff. And it says here, the rise in digital assets creates an opportunity to reinforce American leadership in the global financial system and at the technological frontier, but also has substantial implications for consumer protection, financial stability, national security, and of course, climate risk. They got to throw the climate in there.
Every time.
What does the climate have to do with cryptocurrency?
I know.
So we can see how they're coming up with these, things that all sound really great and wonderful. So people want to do their part and contribute. But again, it's control. And I really do believe that this is going to be this is going to happen, because this is what's going to facilitate this power in the last days to be able to say that you can't buy and sell unless you accept the mark of authority of that reigning power.
Yes.
And so I really do see this coming into play, and there's not anything we're going to be able to do about it. And this is why I think it is really important. And this is why our church has been pushing this from day one. And it's just more and more important than ever now. We can see the benefits to being as less dependent as possible on the systems. Now, I think, a day is going to come where I think they're going to ban that. They're going to ban being off grid.
Yes, no, I agree with you. I personally believe that they're going to herd as many people as they can into the city, and they're going to use things like what you just said, banning certain things to keep pushing people in that direction. And they're always going to give it a really nice story as to why they're doing it, right? To keep everybody on board. Basically, I believe that there's going to be coming in a point where it's going to be not actual SS guards coming to people's houses, but it will come to a point where it'll be a very similar system.
Well, we've even got a taste of that in the news right now in this very country, because the police are actually pushing back on the gun ban, because they're saying, no, I don't want to go to my neighbor's house and tell him I'm taking his guns, and the police are saying, I'm not going to do that. But how much, there was a time during World War II, like you said, with the SS, where that's exactly what happened. Is the soldiers were paid by the government to go to people's houses and steal their guns, and much worse. And so we've seen it happen. We see these things starting to come into play again. And so it is really important to step out.
I wanted to say, if you don't mind, like you say, step out. Know what your values are as a human being. Know what your values are and stand by them, because if you are going to be able to shift in any of your values, you will end up in a place where you're in full control by somebody else. So that's what I'm trying to say, is that through our discussion here, the bottom line for this whole thing is to know what your values are as far as your morality goes, right?
Yeah, and that's good, because that brings us to this great point that the Bible brings up. Jesus says here in John 17:11 and verses 14 to 15, he says, I have given them thy word, and the world hated them, because they are not of the world, even as I am not of the world. I pray not that you should take them out of the world, but that you should keep them from evil. So, this is something that Jesus taught. He wanted for his followers and his people. He didn't want to take them out of the world, because we have a job here, to share the gospel and to witness to people. But he wanted to encourage his people to not be of the world.
Right. Yeah.
Don't get tied in with all these things. Don't become so dependent on the world that you can't live and can't exist without it. Jesus said, I am not of the world, so I don't want you to be of the world either. That's what that meant. And that was his teaching 2,000 years ago. But as humanity, because of our natural inclination to have things convenient and handed to us, we always gravitate to the cities and to the convenience. And the devil knows this. And so I really think ultimately it is part of that devil's plan to be able to control people. And so it is. So, maybe moving to the country is really scary for people, but there's a lot of really great resources out there. I'm trying to do my best with learning a lot of things in advance, so I can share with other people of what not to do, what to do and what not to do. I mean, I grew up in the woods, so I kind of was raised with a lot of it. But there is a learning curve, absolutely. But it's totally possible. It's absolutely possible. You'd be surprised what we can get used to doing when we just put our hearts and minds to it. And I think, like you said, we have to first get our priorities right first. And this is why Jesus said, don't be of the world. And in Romans 2, it said, do not follow after the pattern of the world, but by the renewing of your minds, you will know the perfect will of God. And I really do believe it's God's will for us to not be involved with the cities and societies and the ideologies that the world is pushing out. And it's much easier to get pulled into those things when you're in the city and when you're surrounded by it all the time. And so a lot of things, I just really want to encourage people to think about that. Think about where you are. And you might have to make some sacrifices. You might have to lose a few little conveniences. You won't be able to walk across the street to the 7-Eleven and get a slice of pizza at 11 o'clock at night. But, like where I am, stores are closed after 7 o'clock. So, if you want to have some potato chips to snack on later, you better get them earlier in the day.
Well, I mean, as you've been talking, a phrase comes to mind, and that is freedom is not free. So like there's going to be some stuff that we have to do in order to have our freedom.
Yeah.
There was a lot of people back in the dark ages that were trying to avoid the system as well, and they would just move out into the rocks, into the mountains, and survive out there.
Yeah.
Their life was tough, but they had the freedom to do what they wanted to do. They were not dictated by any system, and they were able to study the scriptures the way that they wanted to.
Yeah. I'm actually going to talk about that in an upcoming presentation here next month, a couple weeks.
Probably about 3 weeks from now.
3 weeks, I think. And but I'm going to talk about that because that did already happen, where God's church, during a time of persecution and absolute authoritative control by the ruling power, had to disappear into the wilderness. And God protected them during that time. God protected the church, his church, and we're going to talk about what that is in a couple weeks.
Yeah.
And he'll do it again, and he's promised he'll do it again. So for those who have their minds for Christ and call themselves Christians, this doesn't have to be a scary thing. This is actually, we can say that this is God's will for everybody. But not that we, it's also his will that we still work with the cities, because we have to share the gospel and warn other people and teach other people. But he doesn't want us to be drawn in and dependent like that.
Absolutely, I agree. Yeah. Well, this has been a really awesome episode. I've really enjoyed hearing about what you're doing out there and stuff. To our viewers, I think that Mark and I talked a little bit about it. In the spring here, if we are able to, we'll make a little bit of a quick documentary on kind of his setup and make a little clip about that. Also, be sure to tune in tomorrow for the righteousness trap, and it kind of ties into a little bit with what we're talking about today. So be sure to tune into that. Also, be sure to drop a comment in the comments below, and if you have a question about anything, or you want us to, banter back and forth about a subject of any kind, put that in there. And again, we really appreciate you guys taking the time to watch these things. We appreciate the donations, everything. It's just been wonderful. The Lord has been super blessing.
Yeah, stay strong in the faith and keep sharing and doing your part, and we'll see you next time. God bless.
Join Nelson Adventist Media on YouTube, Rumble, and Facebook for good sermons, praise time, prep talk, testimonies, health segments, and more.
Well, folks, thanks again for watching and participating with us in our ministry here at the Nelson Seventh-day Adventist Church. It's important if you could just like us and follow us on Facebook, or, like our videos and subscribe to our channel there on YouTube. That would help us a lot. And your financial involvement, too, is very much appreciated. The money that you folks have given has helped us upgrade our church, our lighting, our carpet. We've done many things at the church and our ministry here. We're looking forward to developing our health ministry. It's something that we believe is important for our community. And we need, of course, equipment and renovations for that as well. But we're turning our basement into a health ministry place for the Nelson community. And just appreciate and covet your partnership with us in that endeavor. And so thank you again for watching, and God bless you, and we wait for his soon return.